Today we extend our third-person character controller from last week by adding jump functionality to it. Like before, we focus on the code and the structure for learning how to do it. Welcome back to another episode in our series on Godot character controllers. So, quick recap. This is the code that we have so far. If you want to know more about how to write this, have a look at episode 2 of this series. In fact, watch both prior episodes if you have not already done so. We now add a basic jump feature to this third-person character controller, and again, this is the most basic approach. We will beef it up later. But first, we want to develop a small model of what happens when jumping, in terms of states. So, what is a state? State are distinct modes of being or existence. States are usually limited in time and they shift from one state to another. Sounds abstract, I know. So let's think about an example. Your toaster. For most of the day, the toaster sits around doing absolutely nothing. We could call that state idle. In the morning, you put in 2 slices of toast. We could call that loading. And then you press the slider and you wait. We could call that toasting. And after about a minute or two, it finishes. We could call that serving. So this means in terms of this basic model, we have 4 states for our toaster and us using it. So let's go back to our character controller and jumping. In the beginning, our character is idle in the world, doing nothing jumping related, until we press the space bar and the character jumps. We move the character up the y-axis for a short moment, after which the character is falling down and then landing on the ground. Let's look at that in a little bit more detail. In this table, we have our 4 states in the first column: idle, jumping, falling, and landing. And then we want to recognize these states by the variables that we have available. And also we want to know what we have to change on those variables. So for the variables to recognize any of these states, we need 3 things. We have isOnFloor, that is a kinematic body function provided by Godot that tells us if the character is currently on the floor. That's useful. Then we have snap, that's something we have to set. And then we have keys that we get from our input variable. We also frequently have to set snap into some other mode, and we may have other variables to change. For idle, we have isOnFloor is true because we're on the floor, and we also snap down. There's no key being pressed and we don't change anything because we are idle. Then when we press the space key, then we need to set the snap vector to 0 because we want to leave the floor, and manipulate our velocity y value because we want to move the character upwards. Then we shoot upwards, and when falling, we are not on the floor anymore. The isOnFloor is false. Snap is 0 because we set it to 0, and there's nothing else to do because that's a passive process, at least for now. And then when we are landing, we are on the floor again. isOnFloor is true. Snap is 0 because it's still 0 from when we changed it, and we need to change the snap vector to down because we snap it back to the floor again. This is our entire process, but sometimes we want to double jump. So while falling, I want to jump again. That's kind of a cool feature, and in this tutorial we're going to add that as well. So back to our table. In that case, while we are falling, this grayed out area, we want to do something there. I can now, while I'm falling, add another jump by pressing space, the space key again, and then I have to manipulate the velocity y value yet again. I should also keep track of the number of jumps I have in here. This is called jumps. And while I'm doing that, when landing, I have to set the number of jumps back to 0 so I can do it all over again. And that should sort out my multi-jump feature. And our last task is to remove all those states where we don't change anything. And idle is one of them. So we can remove idle and we just have 3 states left. But now enough talking, let's go to coding. So now we need to write some code to recognize these states. That means we need to have code to recognize jumping, falling, and landing. We are jumping, in fact, when we are on the floor. when we are at the same time snapped in vector 3 down, and when we also press a button, is action adjust pressed and move jump button. And so we do the same thing for the remaining, and then we get this. Let me just correct that. So we have one piece of code for jumping, one piece of code for falling, and one for landing, and this is basically one-on-one from the table. So now we have to write different cases treating these different states individually. If jumping, then we do some print jumping. Else if we are falling, then we do something else, print f. Or else if we are landing, then we do print L. So right now when we run this, we can certainly jump, but we never really fall and we never really land because we haven't jumped really. So let's do that next. We need to have a velocity. Well, we need to have a velocity y, and we do that by a jump intensity. And we get an error right away because we haven't really declared it. And we just put a random value here. The error goes away. And when we jump, we also need to set snap to 0 to be able to get off the floor. So when we now go into jumping, then we get a lot of landings here actually. Why do we get that? Yeah. When we land, we actually have to set snap back to down, and we rerun that, and then I just get one landing. Okay, good. So this basically is our basic table for jumping, falling, and landing, and we have now a way to just do lots of different jumps and so on, and we can jump around and jump into the abyss as well. So let's do the double jump. Normally I would be removing this state falling because I'm not doing anything here except the print. We kept it because I want to put the double jump here. So while I'm falling, you remember the graphic, I want to be able to press spacebar again and jump again. So here I basically do a check in the input is action just pressed, my move jump. When that happens, I do my velocity y with my jump intensity, and I jump once more. So when I run that, I can jump as many times as I like and get my character slowly into space. Great, it's fun, but not quite what I wanted. And we look at our table, we want to control these jumps by saying, well, I only want to do that if I have, and I actually don't need that bracket here, if jumps is smaller or equal 1, I can do a second one. And it complains because it doesn't know what jumps actually is, so I need to declare jumps. I set that to 0, and I forgot my bracket here, and then I can run this, and now I can still do that a lot more. Jumps is being set, but it's never being increased. So jumps needs to be increased here, but also when I'm jumping down here, I'm having an increase by 1. And then I can run that, and then I can do that exactly 2 times, but only the first time. So that's interesting. Can only do it the first time because when I'm landing, I'm carrying over that effect. I actually have to set it back to 0 here. And that's all in the table. I can do it 2 times now, and when I'm landing, I can do it 2 times again. The only thing that's not in the table is that I had to set it here as well, because I jumped here as well. The first formal jumping, that's not in the table, so please forgive me. But otherwise, this is basically all this logic is from the table. So we've been planning that out. And of course, like always, there's a bit of back and forth between code and table, but hopefully the table allows you to kind of see how you can think about building such a functionality, and if you want to change it, how to change it around. So I hope that was useful, and that brings us to the end of this video. So thank you for sitting through this rather long video. I took the approach of analyzing the jump and multi-jump features in more detail using states, analyzing these states with a table, and then turning it into code. Please let me know if you like the style and leave suggestions for future videos. Like and subscribe and hit that bell for next time, and mind yourself, and see you soon.